story. It's a climax, actually, of Jesus in public, but privately talking to his disciples. This is about a simple, little, unnamed, unknown, poor widow, a hero. And millions know about her now, even though she was unknown then. And we'll get to that story in a little bit. Before I do, I want to make sure you know, based on what I've talked about, I think in the last video, about prayers, which in my opinion is the most important activity any Christian and every Christian should know. This is the most important activity that any human being should do, praying. Scripture says that, by the way. It's 1 Timothy chapter 2. It says, first of all, prayers. Yeah, it's good. But here's the thing. I want to emphasize the fact that long prayers are important, like really pouring out your heart. And the more you grow in God, the more you know about Him, the more you realize how much prayer is needed. And it really is the most important activity you should do. You can pray all day, by the way. That's cool, isn't it? Because God literally is walking with you. He's right there, and you can talk to Him about everyone and everything that you see, and it's really, really cool. But I just wanted to know that, mention that, and that his coming at, He is really coming against the long prayers is really about their pretense. They were pretending to talk to God, and they weren't really. They're almost like praying to Himself. It reminds me of a Pharisee that He mentioned in a parable. All right, anyway, this is cool. Jesus, really talked about, as a matter of fact, the Bible talks about money a lot. This is fake money right here, but real money. It really is important to know what to do with money. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes, money answers all things, and He's talking about it really is important to be able to live with money, not in money, and all that. But the fact is, 800 times or so it's been said that the Bible talks about money. That's a lot. Some people actually believe that 1 out of 10 verses in the New Testament is about money. That's a little strong, or at least what Jesus talked about. Jesus did talk about it a number of times. I've mentioned it before. I'm talking fast, aren't I? Because I have so much to share. Slow down. I'll try and slow down. And Matthew 6, by the way, in the Sermon on the Mount, almost a third of it is about money. I think I've mentioned that before. It's really, really important. And that Sermon on the Mount that Jesus mentioned. Money is important. However, it's not to be loved. It's not to be sought after. It's not to be trusted. These are 3 definite things that the Bible teaches. And so this lady, wow, this little widow, I don't know how old she was. She could have been a young widow. There's old widows, there's wealthy widows, which I think probably was what Jesus was talking about earlier, like a widow being taken advantage of by a scribe. Even poor widows as well. Now, this one is poor, probably just because of her appearance or because of the supernatural knowledge that Jesus had. Because let's get to the point here, and look at this. It's going to be interesting here. We're going to bring that out a little bit later. But this is the last story of Mark 12. Then we'll do a video of review. So much to review. It's so much. Jesus sat opposite the place where the offerings were. He sat up against where the offerings, there were something about the treasury. I might have to take 2 videos on this as I'm thinking about it. It's just too much. It's so good. Listen to it. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd. He's just sitting there like I am. A couple manuscripts say standing, but most of them say he was sitting. I think he was sitting. And there's seats in that place. And we'll talk about the place in a little bit. He was sitting there and he's watching people just put in. He's just observing them. God observes everything, by the way. And He notices every detail about everything. He notices the caterpillars and the worms and the bugs and the animals and all the billions and trillions of stars. He knows everything about those stars. He watches them continually. God is an amazing, incredibly great God. He said he was watching the crowds. Yeah, he was watching them in their temple treasury. He said many rich people threw in large amounts. And they literally kind of threw it in. I'll explain that a little bit later. But a poor widow came. Yes, our heroine, the woman hero, came and put in 2 mites. M-I-T-E-S, mites. Little pieces, the little copper pieces, copper coins. They were the smallest coins there were at Palestine, in Israel at that time, current among the Jewish people. There's farthings, by the way, which I think he mentions it here. Put into, let me go back. Large amounts, widow came and put 2. And by the way, the farthings was mentioned by Mark because he was talking, I think, in Rome. His gospel was for the Romans, and the translation of that, sorry, this is get a little, is Latin. So he was telling that they didn't know what mites were in Jerusalem, but in Rome, he used words like with Latin word here, or that would be translated in Latin, a Greek word that would tell them how much it is. Worth only a fraction of a penny. That may not be exactly accurate on it, but anyway, this is a pretty good guess. It's very small. Calling his disciples to him, he summoned them. Come here. So the disciples are there with him, and he said, come here, come here. And then he probably explains what she just did, put in 2 mites. The rabbi, by the way, said you never put in just 1, but 2, so she gave it all. But anyway, the rabbinic teaching at that time, the rule. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, I tell you the truth. This poor widow, a widow for you young ones means she lost her husband, the love of her life. And it was hard on widows back then. They didn't have nursing homes. They didn't have retirement plans and all that. She didn't have Social Security to help her. And it was really a struggle for them to live. Most of the time, families took care of her, but maybe she didn't have much of a family. And it looks like she was working because of Luke chapter 21. This is mentioned in Mark and Luke, not Matthew or John this time. And in Luke 21, it actually mentions the idea that she gave all she had here in her labor offering. So she was a little worker, making as much as she could, which isn't much. Maybe she took the money that she got that day, because this could have been the end of the day, and she went to the temple and gave this, and then gave all her living, everything she worked for. I'm getting emotional. I am moved by her. She's such a sweetie. It says, I tell you the truth. Oh, calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, I tell you the truth. By the way, he said that 13 times in Mark. Of a truth I tell you is what Luke said. In other words, verily, verily, I say unto you. And the actual word is amen or amen, I tell you. In other words, truly I say. In other words, everything he says is true, but he's really emphasizing this, like, check this out. Like, I'm really emphasizing and punching this one. Give attention to this. This poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. I think it's all the others put together. But maybe he was watching the rich give. And they gave a lot, because it says what he said, they all gave out of their wealth, out of their abundance, the leftovers. They had a lot of money and they said, oh, I'm going to give. And they gave a lot. God was, pleased with the idea that people giving in this temple. It's necessary, like giving in church and, and things like that. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, and by the way, the word poor here in this passage right here, this poor little widow, isn't just any peasant. The actual Greek word means pauper. Like paupers are beggars and all. This is the poorest of the poor. Woo, lower class money-wise, but upper class in God's sight. Yeah, baby. It says, put in everything, all she had to live on. Wow. She gave all her money. She obviously was living just little by little on whatever she had daily. It reminds me of Jesus saying, pray this prayer. And he says, give this day. She prayed daily for food and all. But she said, you know what? I'm going to give it. I think she could have decided that I'm going to fast today. I'm so grateful to God. I love him so much. I'm so thankful. I'm going to give everything. And then she fasted that day, and then she went to work the next day. And then maybe she had that and kept it and paid for her food. Oh, I love this woman. All right, let's get in this. There's so much. Well, first of all, let's find out where she was. It says the treasury. And the research is wonderful on this. There's so much that has been offered by Josephus and a guy named Alfred Edersheim. Oh my goodness, really good. Jeremias, I mentioned him last time. All right, so he was over here, evidently, probably somewhere out here teaching, probably under this colonnade here, this open roof thing, a roof with open areas to get in and out. So he obviously he went over here, because this is where the treasure is. He probably went through this gate right here. It's called the Eastern Gate, and also what's very possible right there is called the Gate Beautiful. which, by the way, oh no, I'm never going to get done with this video. Acts 3 with Peter, James, and John, when they went into the temple, Peter and John actually went into the temple to pray at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There was a beggar sat there, and he must have been put there quite a bit, maybe a little bit later, maybe now, I don't know. Maybe Jesus doesn't see him, maybe he did, he just walked by, I don't know. So, and it goes upward, up in the steps. There's 15 steps here, and there's some here, but anyways, going into this eastern gate. By the way, there's a porch area, like with the roof over here too, with columns, like pillars, big round things that hold people. This is huge, by the way. See, this looks real small on my board because I don't have a big enough board to show how large it is. This whole thing could have been, I think I've read different things, 25 acres, the whole, this is a big one, court of the Gentiles. The court of women right here, according to Josephus, and he did exaggerate pretty much on some things, 15,000 people can fit into that. That's huge. And this is where most likely people, when they started worshiping and the Levites would play their instruments up here and start worshiping, this is where all the Jewish people would come. The Gentiles would be out here, and they would worship too as they heard music. But the Gentiles were not allowed at this point to walk in here. They even had little signs. By the way, there was a sign actually that was found in archaeological digs, that about 4.5 feet tall, and it said, you Gentiles are not allowed to go any further. And there was the Levites, some of the Levites had a job of policemen, and they weren't like temple police security, and they weren't allowed in here. That's why it's called court of women. Men were allowed in here. When it says court of women, it's not like just women could go in there, but Jewish men and women, but women were not allowed to go past that unless they had a special purpose for sacrificing or giving themselves or praying with the priests or something up here. This is called Court of Israel, the Court of Priests, and it goes on in, back to where the Holy of Holies is. But anyway, here it is, a Court of Women. Now, this is where the treasury was, all through here. All around the sides and up against the walls were 13 treasure chests, coffers, containers. And they probably were so high. I have something, and it was actually called the trumpets. Because at the bottom, and I'm pretty sure this is accurate in my research, the bottom was like the bottom of a trumpet. Can you see this right here? And it was a lot larger than this, wide. There were 13 of them. And so they weren't this thin. You couldn't put coins in this. I don't know if you could see this whole thing. But there's a trumpet-like, it was trumpet-shaped, shofar shaped, like a ram's horn. And it came up, and then it was open here, and it might have been a little bit of opening here, and then they would throw their coins in. And the coins would hit this, like, you could hear it. And the little mite wouldn't make hardly any noise at all because they were like really small. Mites were the very, very, very small currency right there. Smallest there is, by the way. She gave 2 of them. And that currency right there would equal, it's not easy to figure out and estimate the exact thing of what it was 2,000 years ago when Jesus, was on earth in 1st century. But it's been estimated at 1/4 of a penny. Here's a penny. 1/4 the value of it, like 1/4 of a penny. Now, I've also read 1/3 of a penny. I've read 1/5 of a penny and 1/8 of a penny. So I don't know which, but let's get it this way. It's really small worth. You can't buy very much. A meager meal, maybe even not that much. So there's different opinions on that, but regardless, it was the smallest thing there was at that time. That is, everybody says, definitely was like that. And now, what are these trumpets like things? So I think I'll end with this because I think it's interesting. Remember, there's 13 of them. Well, really, there's 11, and then there's 2 of them that had to do with taxes. It's the half shekel. And let me explain that real quick. The temple tax, you had to pay half shekel every year. And you'd come into the temple once, like one of the festivals or feasts, and then you would give your half shekel. So they're called trumpets. It's like the trumpet shofar shaped chests, or like containers, let's call it. Yeah, 13 containers. So here, I've got what each of them are. Pretty interesting. So, and then we'll end with this because I could go on and on. Wait till you get to the good part. I mean, this is good, but it gets better. Second video that I do on this. All right, so we have the temple tax. There's two of them. One is the old, and then one is current, this year and past. So you're supposed to pay a half shekel. All right, then you have the offering from the poor people. And that could have been her, but I think it was later that she could have put it in one, but maybe she did put it in that. I think she was just coming in to give an offering to God. And maybe if she lived in Jerusalem, she did this a lot. She gave as much as she could. She gave as much as she could. But she had to pay for food and things like that. So, I don't know. But anyway, this could have been like a one-time stop after a while, and then she saved up more. I don't know. And it was probably just her living that she was living off of, All right, her little labor. All right, so we have a poor there. That was like you put in money for the turtle doves. Number 4 was for the pigeons, because that is a poor man's offering. That, by the way, is what Mary, mother of Jesus, gave in her offering once Jesus was born. When she went to the temple, she gave that offering right there. And they didn't bring their birds, because that would be too much. You had to catch a bird and all that. The priests had birds. The priests would sacrifice birds every day. What they would do is they would take all the money out of that turtle dove, like treasury, that trumpet-like thing I showed you, and they would take the money and they would count it out and say, oh, that's how many turtle doves for that day that they would sacrifice. Or they would sacrifice the pigeons that day for that amount of money. So whoever, you just put in the money and they figured it out, like how many did it daily. All right, so that's the poor, the young pigeons. The fifth trumpet was used for wood. You had to have wood for offerings. 6 was frankincense, incense. This frankincense was in the holy place. What they burn that continually, so you put a little money in that if you want to give offering for that. The other thing was basically gold that was given for sin offering. Down here was trespass, so I'm not sure exactly. As I continue to research, I'll be able to find more out. But for the mercy seat, that was money for their sin offerings. I've sinned, I'm going to give an offering for that. Then the leftover from here, let's say you put in so much here, and then you maybe this filled up, and then you go to number 7. I'm not sure, but the leftovers was also for the trespass sin. Maybe there's a difference between trespass and sin offering. It seems in the Old Testament. We'll get to that when we study it. Then we have extra birds. Something that they give, and all plus. And I don't know for these 6 right here are voluntary. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. From 8 to 13. I don't know if the order of this. Nazarite doesn't have to be here. This doesn't have to be here. I'm not sure about the order. But they did a Nazarite one, their cleansed leper one, which I've talked to you about it earlier with the cleansed leper who came to this thing. But we'll get into it more. And then just voluntary. All these are free will offerings. So in short, we have a temple tax, we have the poor bird offerings, we have the sacrifices, the holy place, the sin offering, and free will offerings. I think she gave to the free will offerings, one of those. But I don't know, the Bible doesn't say, and so I can't say for sure. Could have been poor man's offering, but I don't think so. That's usually given, well, I don't know, it could have been a poor man's, like the birds, the voluntary. Remember I mentioned birds in there, so it could have been a thing there. Anyway, that's kind of interesting to me. Maybe you're bored with it, but I'd like to know Jesus' world. What was it like? What was the temple like? 15,000 people could fit in there. That's one massive place. And like I said, that's where they came in, the men and women and the children. And the women and children, I think possibly, I'm not sure, had a little lifted up gallery around there, like maybe where the offering things were. But they worshiped when they sang, like here and there, at least maybe morning sacrifices, evening sacrifices at 9 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock. The singers, the trumpet players, the harpists, and, different musicians would come out and worship. And you would just want to go in and worship God. You look towards the west, towards the holy place, like I mentioned in that place. And they all were in that women's court, just worshiping Yahweh, worshiping God. And that's a beautiful thing. And they did that daily. All right, well, that's it for right now. Don't miss the next one, because we'll get into the depth of this. It's pretty deep in what this woman did. And she made it into the pages of the Bible. In my opinion, I hope I don't go too much longer, but I just want to say this. In my opinion, nobody noticed her. God noticed her. Jesus noticed her. God up in heaven and Jesus on earth noticed her. And so she just walked in quietly, did her business, and walked out. And God took note. Powerful what she did. We'll get into that later. God bless you. Thank you for listening.